So I'm the chief engineer at Air Studios, and I have been for some years now, based up in London, mainly doing film work, recording scores for some of the bigger pictures, and recently just done Sherlock for Hans Zimmer. So since working here, I mean, obviously we get a lot of films through the door. I mean, my first big feature was actually Stargate, which did very well. And I started a relationship there with David Arnold, and through him I've done, well, now 5 Bond films, which is pretty good. And obviously a fair amount of work with Hans Zimmer as well. So we had Hans in the Pirates of the Carribean series, DaVinci Code, and obviously Sherlock. I use the 6000 mainly in the mix environment. One of the main things that I use the TC for is just to bring everybody into the same space. So the orchestra obviously have been recorded in a big space, and you put a little bit of TC on that, and then you will have drums that have been recorded in a much smaller booth, but you maybe want to have them feel like they were in with the orchestra. So that's a case of expanding the space that they were originally recorded in. Particularly you get a lot of ethnic drums in film where you would have done them with the orchestra, but practically it doesn't work for whatever reason, technology or the fact that the parts are unplayable, or a lot of stuff now is sequenced in a way that it's not very real, if that makes sense, but you want to sink it in as if it were real. And the TC6000s are great for just massaging that overall sheen, if you like, that gives it the feel that everything was done at the same time in the same room. And that does give a sort of a sense of cohesion. And when you look at it on a big 60-foot screen, the idea that somehow everything is in the same world does mean that the dubbing mixers can pull it all down, and you don't get things popping out and kind of drawing attention to themselves, which in film music you don't really want too much, because that sort of takes you, if your ear is drawn to something happening over here, you're not watching the film and you're not paying attention to the storytelling. On Sherlock we had to master the album in a hurry to get it ready for Oscar nominations, and it was a case of I wasn't worried about the fact that I didn't have much time to do it, because I had a TC, I had the mastering software on it, and it was like, this is just going to be a case of banging the 5-channel through it, listening to it, tiny bit of EQ where necessary, squash it so that you get a decent dynamic range to the CD. And so, I was able to master the thing in 5.1 at the same time as we did the stereo, without having a sort of big panic of, we've got to get to a mastering room to do this. And as I said, at that particular occasion, we had like a day and a half to get it ready. So it was very useful to be able to just switch from reverb mode into mastering mode, feed the finished mixes in, and just smooth it all out and make it feel like a record. For me, the best thing about it is it's easy to use. It's a no-brainer. You turn it on, press 3 buttons, and it's working for you in your favour. You don't have to sit there and do complicated configurations or whatever it is. It's there, and it's visually very obvious. What's happening on this fader is obviously happening there. There's no confusion, which certain other devices, which are particularly heavy on the menu-driven side of things, can be. You can find yourself going, I know what I want to do, but I can't see how to get that sound to arrive at that. Or if I change the reverbs, it changes the routing or whatever. And then obviously, it sounds good from the off, out the box, which again is great. So it's a low maintenance, good sound. The TC6000 series, the thing that I love about the sound of them is there's a depth to the way the reverb works. There's a sense that the processing is all the way to the end of the tail. It's not just about the initial impression that you get. A lot of reverbs sound fantastic in the first initial moments, and then as you listen to the die-away, especially if you turn it up loud, you start to hear that the algorithm is kind of busking it a bit, and they're sharing processing power with the computer that's also driving God knows how many other plugins, and it's also playing the audio back, and the internal plugin thing. 9 times out of 10, if you listen to it closely, it's a bit grainy towards the sort of the die-away. So I mean, when we recorded Sherlock here, obviously, and then when it came to the mix, I flew out to LA and mixed it at Hans Zimmer's place. Hans having done the score, and there were some tweaks to be made. And while I was there, obviously one of the ways that we work is we stem things out so that we have the orchestra separate to the small violin section that we had, separate again to the drums. And for each of those sections, each of those stems, I should say, I had a couple of TC-6000s, so I had 8 in total. And we were then doing a couple of passes so that we could separate further within those 8. So there were 16 stems that went to the dub. But yeah, one of the things that was really important for that score was that it had to have a very intimate, in-your-face sound. And people, generally when you think of the 6000 series, people think of long cathedrals and the big sort of orchestral sounds. But actually, a lot of what I used it for on that were these sort of small, roomy type environments. So that the sound that you'd have, for instance, we just have a single violin very scratchily recorded right up close next to the bridge. So it didn't sound anything like the traditional big violin, and it was almost percussive in its nature. And then I used the TC to just sit it in the rooms in a way that it felt like it had been played with the orchestra, and it was part and parcel of this whole process. And it's quite a cheeky score, and being able to sort of glue these rooms together using the TCs was an integral part of making that score sound the way that it did. And I think it does sound quite different to a lot of other scores. And that process was definitely helped by having a bank of 6000s that I could draw upon. The reason people come to Air, I think, is threefold really. It's a great sounding room. The rooms here and also in Studio One sound fantastic. Secondly, the gear is top notch. It's a safe bet. There's a large range of mics, of outboard equipment. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the people here are fantastic. Everybody wants to help you make the film, the record, whatever it is you're doing here. And I think people really connect with that.